Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
So it's the morning after Usyk's heavyweight debut. Many people are reacting to this, and some of the reactions are actually expected. That unless Usyk goes in there and looks nothing short of spectacular, gets the guy knocked out in the first round, takes his head clean off his shoulders and it lands somewhere up there in the rafters, there are going to be critics. There are going to be people who are dissatisfied with what they are looking at. I'm not the least bit surprised by this because in spite of boxing having many spectators, and what is a spectator sport, in spite of the abundance of people who watch the sport and discuss it actively day after day, week after week, there are very few people, even fewer people, that understand what's going on and what the fighters are doing, why it's being done. You know, Usyk's heavyweight debut, it was always intriguing to me because I figured the task at hand for Usyk is not going up there and becoming Rambo. You know, not going up there like a Gatling gun and getting guys out of there. The task at hand, as far as I was concerned for Usyk, was using the strengths that he has and tweaking them.
Small adjustments.
To work around the imposing size of today's heavyweights. Because these guys are a lot bigger than what a heavyweight used to be. You know, the average size of a heavyweight way back when was anywhere in between, 6 feet to 6'3", you know, whereas now you got guys anywhere from 6'4" to 6'8". It's a different era of boxing, you know, it's a lot of lumbering lummoxes up there. And the task for Usyk, I figured, moving up to that division, the task for Usyk is not relying on punching power and strength of arms because he didn't do that as a cruiserweight. So why the hell would he be doing it as a heavyweight?
He wouldn't.
Didn't make a lot of sense to me. What I figured the task at hand for Usyk, and what it still is now that he's up there, is making the necessary adjustments, the tweaks to the fighter that he already is, which is a very accomplished and skillful fighter, but making the tweaks to adjust to the land of the giants, the big men. That may be decreasing his output, not opening up as much, thus depriving the other guy of opportunities to catch him between the punches, being a bit more economic, more judicious
with his offense
throughout the course of a match, and using what his strong suits are, what he's good at. And what's Usyk good at? Manipulating angles
with his movements,
spectacular footwork
to exploit openings
or create them. That upon his ascension to the heavyweight division, he's not going to become an artillery guy. He's not going to suddenly become an entirely different fighter so much as make the adjustments to continue to be the same fighter that he used to be, use what tools he normally uses, but make the small tweaks, the small adjustments for the heavyweight division. That's what I figured he was going to do, and that's more or less what he did. He gave Chaz Witherspoon, I think he gave Chaz Witherspoon's power a lot of respect without ever having to feel it, without ever having to pay the consequences for a lapse in judgment. He gave that guy's power a lot of respect from the opening bell, and that's wise. That's important.
Very important.
And that is what's conducive towards what could be his continued success as a heavyweight. Realizing that in a division where you're always one punch away from being knocked out, you might have to shorten up the punches and shorten up the output. Every time you throw a punch, there's a chance that something might come back at you. In that situation, what a volume puncher really should do is be more judicious, be more economic. Don't even open up as much as you used to, because every time you do, something might come back at you. And that's what I think more or less we saw last night with Usyk, that he's going to give the guys power, respect, without ever actually having to feel it. And he's going to fight safely,
cautiously,
round after round. Because in this division, the longer the fight wears on, the more it favors Usyk. These big guys, they hit plenty hard, but they're really not accustomed to having to move around the ring that much. Not in all the same ways that he is. So the longer the fight goes on, the more it favors Usyk. And the more opportunities he will then have to take over the fight after 3-4 rounds. Once the other guy's tired and his hands are starting to sail a little bit low, the punches are coming in a little slower than they were at the beginning of the match. These are the opportunities that Usyk creates by playing it safe, being cautious, and careful. The question now on everyone's minds, what I see the boxing community asking themselves and each other is Usyk ready for the likes of a Wilder? Is he ready for the likes of a Joshua? Is he ready for the likes of a Ruiz, a Fury, a Parker, a Chisora, a White? This is the question that people have got on their minds right now. And, I hate to be the guy that always says I told you so, but I wasn't expecting Usyk to be ready for those kinds of guys after one fight at the weight. I don't know why you guys would be. I don't know why you guys be expecting that, but I wasn't. Whether it was Takam,
yeah,
or it was Spong,
yeah,
or it was Witherspoon,
yeah,
I never figured that Usyk's going to go from this fight right into those kinds of fights with those kinds of fighters. One, because that's very counterintuitive, doesn't make a lot of sense, but two, more importantly too, all those other guys, all those big name guys that pose all those different challenges, they're booked anyway, so I'm not expecting Usyk to fight one of them straight away after this. Common sense. You know, I know it's supposed to be common, but how common is it really?
Not that much.
We all know that Wilder's got like a 2 or 3 fight plan. He's planning on fighting Ortiz, he's planning on fighting Fury thereafter, and he's talking about unifying if he's successful in those first 2 fights. Anthony Joshua or Andy Ruiz, pick your poison, whichever one of them. Regardless of who wins that fight, they're not likely to fight Usyk next anyway. They're likely to fight Kubrat Pulev, who's the IBF's mandatory challenger. Fury's plan is tied to Wilder's. Parker just withdrew from the Chisora fight, so who knows what he's going to be doing next. Dillian White, he's likely to come back sometime soon, but it's in the near future. Thus, Usyk being part of that near future, well, it really isn't very likely. I mean, this is the news that's been floating around the whole time, that Usyk's ascent to heavyweight has been a talking point. These have been the stories. So you should have been able to put 2 and 2 together, that regardless of what you think, and regardless of how Usyk looks in his heavyweight debut, he's still not likely to fight one of those fighters next. So there's obviously more work needs doing that's likely going to get done long before he fights a Wilder, a Joshua, a Ruiz, a Parker, a White, or a Chisora. In truth, I don't think he's ready for those fights. Not straight away, but I wasn't expecting him to be. Thus, there's no harsh criticism to levy. And anyone trying to levy criticism at Alexander Usyk, I mean, take a good look at who these fucking guys are. Pathological liars, sycophants for the PBC and Deontay Wilder.
Yeah, the numbers did come out. It was over 9,000. So 9,000 tickets were sold. Not how many people were in there, how many tickets were sold. Because Tyson Fury had, you know, a good amount of people in, but then come to find out from the Nevada State Athletic Commission, they blocked this motherfucker, Miguel. He a rat. They comped out more tickets than Tyson Fury sold.
Those are the only guys that are talking all this shit. These are the kind of guys that'll tell you that Luis Ortiz is one of the top 2 heavyweights in the world without being able to name a single fighter on the man's resume, without being able to so much as substantiate that kind of an anecdote.
And honestly, bro, I think Ortiz and Wilder are the 2 best heavyweights in the game.
Well, I don't.
No.
I want to ask a question. You an Ortiz fan. You said that, right?
Yes.
What's his best win, man? What's the best guy that he beat? Because you a fan of him.
Every fighter except Deontay, bro.
I didn't ask you.
No, he asked his best opponent, like that he
what's
beat.
What's his best win? Who's the best guy that Luis Ortiz beat? Because you a fan of him, so you should know more about him than I do.
Did Ortiz? I don't remember, bro. I don't know.
You can't tell me. So hold on, wait.
I mean, the guys that they've been fighting is not known, bro. I can't really go.
Hold on. I'll give you a hint. His best win is an African American fighter from Philadelphia.
All right. Did he fight Brian Jennings? No, he didn't fight Brian.
Nah, he didn't fight Brian McGregor.
What about?
Wait. Stop that game. McGregor. Remember, he didn't fight Brian Jennings.
No, he didn't. He didn't fight Brian Jennings.
He did not fight. If we don't know shit, that's what we know. That he didn't fight Brian Jennings. This is coming from a Luis Ortiz fan.
So, I mean, who the fuck in their right mind would get their anecdotes from these kinds of people? Honestly. And I know what you guys might be thinking right now. I know what you might be asking yourselves. That if you don't feel that Usyk is ready for the likes of a Joshua, a Ruiz, or a Wilder, what do you make of his comments post-fight, after the Witherspoon fight? Him saying that he wants the winner of Joshua versus Ruiz, and he's looking at, you know, maybe a big Wembley showdown, something along those lines. What do you make of that? I'll tell you what I make of that. I'm not surprised that Usyk is exhibiting a can-do attitude in regards to fighting the winner of that fight. I'm not surprised that they still have their sights set on the winner of Joshua versus Ruiz, but no matter what, regardless of what they're saying, that still doesn't make them very likely to fight that fighter next. The winner of that fight has an IBF mandatory already lined up, whereas in the case of Usyk, well, you just became the mandatory to the winner of that fight. In winning this fight, you just became the WBO's mandatory challenger to the WBO title at heavyweight. Pulev was already there, Pulev was already the mandatory, and it's conceivable that the winner of that fight will likely contend with Pulev before they contend with Usyk. It's likely for this reason that Eddie Hearn hypothesized that while Usyk may be the mandatory challenger and he may fight for a world title real soon, it may not be against the winner of that fight, that title might become vacant and he may fight for it against someone else, thereby affording him the opportunity to become a champion, but not by fighting the winner of Joshua versus Ruiz. I mean, people really aren't taking stock of the situation that essentially the winner of that fight has two mandatory challengers lined up, and depending on how things break down, it could result in two very different scenarios. If Joshua wins that fight, I don't think he means to vacate the title that he just got back. I don't think he would mean to vacate the WBO title that he just won. I don't think he would do that. But if Andy Ruiz wins the fight, well, that's a different story, because Andy is a PBC fighter, and we know that the PBC is attempting to disavow the WBO as an organization, not recognize them. And there's also the PBC's reputation for not playing well with others to consider. You know, if Andy Ruiz wins that fight, it's going to be a pretty hairy situation, because he's going to have a mandatory via Top Rank and a mandatory via DAZN, via Matchroom. And the PBC doesn't play well with either of those outfits, so they're going to have to make a choice. Which one of those situations would they rather deal with? Would they rather deal with Pulev, or would they rather deal with Usyk? And I'm of the opinion that in that situation, in spite of their long history with Top Rank, the issues that they have with each other, in that situation, Andy likely picks Pulev for the fight, because they know DAZN will likely pay through the nose to be able to stage the fight between Usyk and Andy. So what they might do to circumvent that situation is simply have Andy Ruiz vacate the WBO title, throw it in the air, give some kind of public speech about it or whatever, but all in all, the fight itself is just not very likely to happen. Thus, if the WBO title becomes vacant, there's an avenue for Usyk to become a world champion without having to fight the winner of that fight. I struggle to think that Andy Ruiz would win the rematch with Anthony Joshua and then go on to defend his title against Usyk rather than defending it against Pulev. Pulev, who's the older fighter.
Out of both guys.
And Pulev, who's with Top Rank. You know, Top Rank's a great outfit. It's a big outfit. They're on ESPN, so they got some great financial backing. But all in all, I don't think Top Rank is going to pay through the nose to land that fight on ESPN as opposed to the PBC. You know, I could see them getting into a bidding war for that particular fight, whereas Top Rank knows, you know, Pulev's not a big draw in America, and Andy, he's developing a following, but he's not quite there yet. So how much money are we really willing to spend to get this fight? Not that much. In which case, they might actually be willing to send Pulev over there to, you know, PBC for at least one fight, and, you know, do what you can, make of that what you will, and, you know, hope for the best, that he can come back with the titles. But I'm not sure. I don't think that Top Rank would pay through the nose just to land Pulev versus Ruiz. I don't think they would. In the case of Usyk and Andy, however, I do think DAZN would pay through the nose to get that fight. I think they would push for a purse bid because they know they've got the kind of money to land that fight. They can incentivize that situation for both Usyk and Andy. And what the PBC might do in that situation, knowing what's going on, is vacate the title to circumvent it altogether. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Can't Andy Ruiz circumvent this situation with these two mandatories? If he emerges the victor in December, can't he get around Pulev and Usyk by unifying with Wilder? Because unifications, they trump mandatories, don't they? They most certainly do, but there's one fundamental problem. Deontay Wilder's dance card is booked. You know, after he has this fight with Ortiz in November, he's supposed to start off next year by fighting Fury again. And supposedly, if you go by the cover story, the contracts are already signed. Wilder is spoken for. Wilder and his green belt, his WBC title, they're spoken for the next two fights. So I'm not even sure at this point that Wilder's an option, because they've been very vocal about his trajectory and what he means to do in the near future. They've made it clear. Have a Ortiz rematch, a Fury rematch, and then see about unifying sometime next year. They've made that crystal clear, and until further news develops, that's really all we have to go off of. So, you know, just hypothesize. What if Andy wins the rematch? Not saying that he does, but what if he wins the rematch with Anthony Joshua? What if he's ordered to fight both these mandatories simultaneously? What if he vacates the WBO title and opts to fight Pulev instead? What happens if Usyk contends for the WBO title? What if he wins? How does that affect the ring IQ pound for pound list? Well, I'll tell you how it affects it. You know that Usyk is not a career heavyweight. You do realize that he is a cruiserweight who moved up into heavyweight, and that in procuring the WBO title, provided he can get it, If it were to happen that way, that would make Usyk a 2-division champion and thereby set forth the precedents for not only him being reintegrated into the list, but securing what could be a very cushy top 5 spot. And the precedents, the proverbial argument for it, is already there in the criteria. Not only will Usyk become a champion in multiple weight classes, but his quality of competition in the cruiserweight division is the best around. He fought anybody who was anybody and everybody that mattered in that weight class. That's his overall track record, and he's building upon that by attempting to become a champion in the granddaddy of all weight classes. So if he achieves this, if he does this, the argument is there for him to be reintegrated into the list. You gotta remember the rules, folks. Upon his ascension to the heavyweight division, he wasn't participating in a title fight, and he wasn't in possession of one. Thus, he was ejected for not being a world champion at the time he moved up. But based on his track record, what he's already accomplished, what exploits he's already had, the argument is there, and all he's missing
Which ain't much.
is the hardware. So just imagine that the WBO title becomes vacant, and he fights somebody for it, some top guy in the WBO's ranks. He wins. Well, he's reintegrated into the list. That's what would happen. Now, you might be thinking, well, why was he ejected in the first place? Why does he have to be in possession of a world title in order to be ranked on your list? And I'll reiterate, Jorge Linares is just one example of what I'm talking about. When it comes to a guy who might have been an elite fighter in one weight class, but upon moving up, things changed, and that's not what he was anymore. The exact same thing happened to Jose Pedraza. He also was a good fighter, good solid guy in the lightweight division, moved up to 140, and things changed. That wasn't the case. Thus, Usyk could be king shit at cruiserweight. He might have been. But in the heavyweight division, now that's a different set of challenges, and you have more to prove. You have to prove that you belong there, and nothing really proves that better than procuring a world title, given everything he's done so far, in unison with what he could do by procuring that world title. That will structure the argument that substantiates him being ranked as one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. That's because, well, if it were easy, everybody would do it. But every cruiserweight that moves up to heavyweight don't go up there picking up world titles. It doesn't happen that often. It doesn't happen that way at all. If Usyk would have become a champion, having moved up from cruiserweight to heavyweight, he'd become a part of a very short list of fighters that managed to accomplish that. It's a rarity that a cruiserweight goes up there and does this, even in this situation. That would be the testament to what kind of fighter he is. That would be the proverbial proof in the proverbial pudding that would justify Usyk's name being ranked amongst the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. That not only did he square off against every single champion in the cruiserweight division, he actually moved up to the granddaddy of all weight classes and became a champion there as well. And the more he accomplishes there, the higher on the list he would climb. I will say that Usyk being reintegrated into the list, he'd emerge closer towards the top, depending on how he becomes a champion. And what that basically means is, if he were to unseat a Wilder, a Ruiz, or a Joshua for the belts, well, that'd get him ranked much higher on the list than winning a vacant title. But better still, winning the vacant title still would be reflected. So he would be reintegrated into the top 5 for his works at cruiserweight and what he would have just done at heavyweight. So we'll see if it happens that way, and we'll see ultimately what develops, how the cookie crumbles. But these are just some possible scenarios you might want to consider moving forward when tracking the career of Alexander Usyk.